What's going on, everybody? In this video, I want to talk about the relationship between interval notation and inequality symbols. Kind of revisit a topic that I talked about in the Algebra Prerequisites playlist, but I want to go a little bit in depth about it and explain some more definitions. So let's say that I had this interval, -7 to 2. How would I write this as an inequality? So remember that parentheses correspond to the inequality symbols of greater than and less than. And brackets, they include the bounded value, so they correspond to the symbols of less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. So how can we write this interval as a representation of inequality symbols? So what we can do is we have a number x, and x is going to be somewhere in between the bounds of the interval. So we know that -7 is marked with the parentheses, so we know that we're going to have a greater than symbol here. And then a -7 is going to be on the other side of that inequality symbol. And then we also have the right bound is 2, so x is going to be less than or equal to 2. And since it's bounded with a bracket, that means that the value is included, so we write that as less than or equal to 2. So what I'm writing in this inequality notation using the inequality symbols is that any number in between this interval is between -7 and 2, but it could also be 2. So let's say that I had the symbol 4 to infinity. So again, we have parentheses, which means that the endpoints are not included. So we're going to be using the inequality symbols of less than and greater than. So if I have a number x, I know that x is going to be less than infinity at all times because every number is less than infinity. And then we're going to have 4 on the other side because x is in between 4 and infinity, but it is greater than 4 since 4 is the lower bound of the interval. And you can also write it like this and just say that x is greater than 4 because x being less than infinity is already implied, and we would call this an unbounded interval. Every time you see an infinity as one of the bounds for your interval, it's really an unbounded interval because infinity can always increase or decrease. It can always become larger or smaller. So let's say that I had the interval from -infinity to -10. So we have a value in between, and we know that x is always going to be greater than -infinity because there is not a number out there that's smaller than -infinity in this context. And we know that -10 is our right bound, but it's included. So we represent that with a less than or equal to symbol and then a -10 following it. And again, since we have x always being greater than -infinity, and -infinity is one of the bounds, quote, bounds, we can just say that x is less than or equal to -10. Because the fact that x is always going to be greater than -infinity is implied. So we have another unbounded interval here. And then let's say that I have the interval from -2 to 2. So notice how these are bounded with brackets. So I'm going to be using the less than or equal to and greater than or equal to inequality symbols. So if I have a number x in between these two bounds, I know that x is going to be greater than or equal to -2 because of the bracket over here and the fact that -2 is our lower bound. And I also know that x is going to be less than or equal to 2 because 2 is the greater bound, and it's also represented with a bracket. So I'm going to use the less than or equal to symbol for this. And this is what we would call a bounded interval because we have two real numbers in which x is in between that represents the interval, and there's no infinities to be found. So I hope this video was clear about explaining how to translate from regular interval notation into inequality notation. They both mean the same thing, but sometimes can get a little bit confusing on how we orient the inequality symbols to accurately represent the situation. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks you for watching. Stay tuned for the next one. Take care.